Scotland.
Scotland, that's a little further up. And you guys? India? Jamaica? Jamaica as well? Hey! I'm from Indonesia. I'll be fine.
If I knew we were sitting here,
Refrain from touching the bridge though. It's very dead.
Strap thing on and have it in my back.
These flashing lights were increasing in position because the pigeons very desperately wanted a nightclub for this. So that's just a joke. It's actually a window that looks into the Eastbridge Hospital. Look at this building to my right over here. This is, or this grey beige part of the building more specifically. That is the Eastbridge Hospital. Now, that building was founded in 1180 and was at first used to accommodate the pilgrims that would be coming to Canterbury to visit the shrine of someone called St. Thomas Becket. Now, when I say hospital, I don't mean in the terms of a doctor or a nurse. Instead, it actually comes from the Latin word hospite, which means hospitality, or at least to provide hospitality. So that way, that hospital would give a free one-night bed and breakfast for these pilgrims, as chances are the pilgrims would be too poor to afford to maybe stay at a local inn or a nearby tavern. But since it is free, you do get what you paid for, as your bed would be this pile of hay on the floor, and your breakfast would be a very disgusting bowl of porridge. And immediately after you finish your breakfast, the hospital staff will kick you out so that you could continue doing your pilgrimage business. And not exactly 5-star quality stuff, but you didn't pay anything. Ahoy! And earlier I did mention someone called St. Thomas Becket. Have you heard of him before?
Yeah.
Yes? How much have you heard of him so far? He was beheaded. King Henry the second. King Henry the second, but yes. But funnily enough, because the king at this time wanted to have control over the church, but during this period, it was known that the church they don't take orders from the king or the queen, they take orders from the pope. So, but then when Thomas Becket was made archbishop, he kept on doing his duties the normal way, but only taking orders from the pope. So the king felt sort of betrayed, because actually before Thomas Becket was archbishop, he was very close friends with the king. Yeah, so that's why. So when Thomas Becket wasn't listening to him, King Henry felt like his friend's not listening to him anymore. But he was a little bit drunk when he shouted out, "Who will get rid of this priest for me?" But when he said it, he is the king, so his word does carry weight. That way, when the knights were with him, they took that as an order when he shouted it out. Very unfortunate. So who knows? Maybe he really didn't mean to kill his friend. It's his fault. He should be more aware.
And to relieve pressure from the natural cause, this was dug in.
Oh, the Henrys, right? Yeah, because you've heard of King Henry VIII as well, being also a bit sick in the head. Maybe it's like, if you're given that name, you're obliged to be sort of sick psychopath or something.
Harry is Henry as well.
That's not to make fun of anyone named Henry on this boat. Right, the bridge that you guys booked the tour on is called the King's Bridge. It's actually named mockingly after King Henry II, because, well, essentially King Henry II issued Thomas Becket's murder, right? So the Pope was very displeased over this, so he ordered King Henry II to do a walk of shame. So he was stripped down to wear nothing but rags, and followed by monks along the high street, who'd be constantly whipping him and shouting shame at the guy. And supposedly, yes, it's like Game of Thrones. And supposedly, at the King's Bridge that it's called today, there was the point where one of the monks whipped him really, really hard at the back of his head, and he fell to his knees. But then again, sort of deserved. I have no idea. The Empress clothes?
Yeah, I mean, like, so they strip the emperor of this place of king.
Oh.
But no one is, because he's a king.
Yeah.
Like, people are asking, is he dressed or not? And because they're so scared that
Yeah.
they say he's dressed, but he's actually naked.
Could be, I'm not entirely sure. Because usually if you're doing a walk of shame, you would be stripped down naked. But who knows, maybe they had like different rules applied to him because he was just a king. But nonetheless, it's still a very humiliating moment for him, regardless. Now we arrive at this lovely area here, and more specifically this bit of land behind me, that looks like we're about to crash into. But it is called the Franciscan Islands, and the area just past the wall over here is the Franciscan Gardens. This entire location is actually home to followers of that man over there, called Saint Francis of Assisi. Him and his followers were known for these very extreme vows of poverty, whereby they weren't allowed to own any earthly possessions. So no land, money, jewelry, as well as no clothes. Obviously, they can't go around town naked. That's illegal, even during that time. So the next best thing was for them to wear these very cheap and tattered gray rags, as gray at the time was actually the cheapest dye to create. But today, actually, the Franciscan brothers still exist even to this day. If you ever spot people wearing brown cloaks with rope tied around their waist, then you'll know that those are the Franciscans, because today, brown is the cheapest dye to create. But yeah, in other words, they looked very poor. That way, when they first arrived in a city called Dover in 1224, it's like a coastal town, not very far from here, they preached to the public saying that they were men of God. But the public were used to men of the church in England being wealthy and also having them dress the part as well. But these guys, on the other hand, looked almost homeless. So that way, upon their arrival, no one actually believed that they were men of God. And instead, everyone insisted that they were thieves pretending to be men of God, which at that time was an executable offense. Naturally, upon their arrival, they were all arrested and sentenced to die. Now, for me as an international student, that's one of my biggest fears, where I arrive at border control and the first thing they do is arrest me and sentence me to die. Fortunately for these guys, though, they had a very brave Franciscan that shouted at the judge during their time of execution, telling him that if you're going to hang me, you should do so with my own belt. And the judge thought that no sane man or regular person would be so willing to die and go to heaven and meet God, unless, of course, if he was a man of God himself. So after the judge realized his mistake, he released the Franciscans, and then they'd come here to Canterbury and established their friary. Now, fortunately for us, as well as unfortunately for us, the last remaining Franciscan building left in England is that building down this waterway here. Not sure if you can see it because the sun is a bit glaring. But it's the building down there with a little archway, which at the time would have served as the only chapel and the only bridge connecting the mainland to this island. I say it's the last remaining Franciscan building in England, at least, because of that king we mentioned earlier, King Henry VIII, where I'm not sure if you know that when he was trying to divorce his first wife, the Pope wouldn't allow him, so he ended up changing all the churches in England so that they would abide by his rules. And in doing so, he also had a lot of the religious buildings destroyed all across the country, including the ones that would have belonged to this friary here.
These guys really stuck because the grey robes were undyed and unbleached, hence the name the Great Stour monks. Now, quite lucky. You guys have had a really, really nice. Everything sort of lined up perfect for you guys.
Quick pop quiz. Do we know the name of the river that we're on? Alright. 10 points to you. Congrats. But more specifically though, this canal that we're on is entirely man-made, as was built almost 2,000 years ago by the Romans, who were the first inhabitants of this area here. Now the only natural part of the river is the one that goes around the city center, but of course the canal cuts through the city center. But back then it would have primarily been used by merchants to move around their goods. But today, as you can see, it's just primarily used for tourism. And the occasional person that likes to kayak up and down here. Or there's one where it looks like a surfboard, you stand on it and you still paddle. Paddle boats. Paddle boats. Ripples. As well as the occasional drunkard who likes to swim in the river as well.
So all in all, not the most pleasant of stays. Obviously nowadays it's not like that.
During winter, yes. Because this city doesn't get that cold. It only goes to sub-zero for like a couple hours, but it isn't not cold enough to freeze the river. So we just get a lot of rain instead. But later when we go further downstream, you'll see a sort of dam that they use to control the water level. And if you're ever curious about what these big red buildings here that surround the Eastridge Hospital were, they're what's called an almshouse, which is essentially a house for the less fortunate. So if you happen to be financially struggling, you can offer to stay here, where you still have to pay rent, but it would be at a very discounted price, and only for a short time, about up to a month, I believe. Because there was one time where I did try to apply to this accommodation. Unbeknownst to me, it was for the less fortunate, but they wouldn't allow me. It was so cheap, it was very tempting. Would you mind your heads again, please?
Must be continued.
Cannot be 60 seconds.
You can just cut it.
Afternoon everyone. Welcome to Canterbury Historic River Tours. We'll go for the next 45 minutes. My name is Oliver. Before we go too far, we do have to go over a bit of health and safety first. So please keep your hands and legs inside.
Unfortunately, not a lot of
6 November.
It's a tradition to look at it.
Also going to be some fairly low bridges on the route as well.
In Cambridge and in Oxford also, the ones who do this are all students.
Good news. Yeah, if you drown and if you come out of the water, that means, well, you must have used magic, definitely a witch. So she's alive, you know, she's a
Wasn't always
witch.
Pizza
We
Express.
do.
It actually used to be a blacksmith
She's a mother,
forge,
guys.
supplying weapons and armor
No, you're right though, we
during
wouldn't
the
kill you
English
both.
Civil War.
Lose,
Between
Just for having read that, sorry mate.
Look, the
little doorway here that kind of steps out into
Don't
the
worry, we don't do it anymore.
that would have been used by the blacksmiths to pump out and get the hot metal into the river.
They would need so much money though.
We have one out.
More recently, during World War II, that building actually served a very important purpose where it stored the cathedral's stained glass windows, where they would have been kept under the basement of the building and buried under a lot of sand. As Canterbury was unfortunately a very prime target for bombing raids during World War II, primarily because of the cathedral's influence over the local population, and also it being relatively close to mainland Europe. I'd ask you to mind your heads again, please. This bridge is also a lot newer than the other ones that we've gone under, and also a lot taller and cleaner. That's because also, once again in World War II, this time at the fault of the American soldiers, some of them thought it'd be really funny if they drove some of their tanks across the bridge. In doing so, they destroyed the entire underside of the bridge as well, rendering it useless for the next person to use it. But who knows, maybe it was a blessing in disguise, because it would have collapsed otherwise. This more modern building to my right here is Marlow Theatre, which of course, as you probably guess, was built a lot more recently than the buildings we've seen so far. It was constructed in 2011, and you could probably already guess it stirred quite some controversy during its construction. As for one, it doesn't fit the city's aesthetic, not very appealing to the eye. And secondly, it also violates an ancient law that this town has, where, see that grey pointed tip there? So that thing is too tall for the city, as this town has a law where you're not allowed to build structures that exceed half the height of the cathedral's tallest tower. It only violates it by about like 1 or 3 meters. But the architect, yeah, exactly. It's quite a bit, right? But if it was 1 meter, passing, right? But the architect argued to the council, saying that it looks like it's bowing to the cathedral, if anything. Only issue is you'll see that it bows in that direction. The cathedral is this way. This one is also tied with this building, where it used to belong to an old Dominican priory. Are you familiar with the Dominicans? No?
yeah.
Well, for those that aren't, these were holy men originating from Spain, following the principles of Dominic de Guzman. But these Dominicans arrived here in Canterbury in 1221 and only started establishing these buildings in 1236. Another name for these guys actually were Blackfriars. I'm not sure if you've heard that term before while staying here. But the main reason why they're called Blackfriars was because of black cloaks that they would wear. Now, at this time, black was actually the most expensive dye to create. So realistically, only nobles and aristocrats would ever be wearing such a color. So that way, these guys, upon their arrival, were immediately gifted £500 by the king, which today translates to about close to £1 million, was to help them establish all these buildings here. And of course, they didn't just build 2 buildings with that £1 million, they built 11. But during King Henry VIII's Reformation of the church, he had 9 of those destroyed. These 2 only stayed because they were deemed as private property, owned by a very wealthy, unnamed merchant. you probably already noticed this very lovely park here to my right. Actually, if you look at the top of this tree, you'll see fruits up there. Those are pears. That's because this park was once called Solly's Orchard and was actually owned by the Dominicans, where they would grow pears as well as apples so as to produce cider. It's a bunch of holy men creating alcohol. But it was actually more of a public service at the time, because the act of creating cider was one of the few ways to treat the very dirty river water at the time. As you can probably guess, this canal, during the medieval period and even before that, was essentially like the public toilet, like the sewer. So drinking from it is very ill-advised. But of course, since it was so long ago, the cider is very different than the one that we're familiar with today, as it had a very low alcohol percentage of just 1%, and a very thick, malty texture. If you like that, if you tried mixing bread in a glass of water, it's more like the texture of soup, really. But since it had such a low alcohol percentage, you'd actually find children be required to drink this as well. There'd be kids as young as 6 months old drinking 6 to 8 pints of cider a day. I mean, it's similar to how we're supposed to drink 6 to 8 glasses of water a day, but instead these kids have to chug pints of alcohol. Now, during the summer period, you still see some of the university students carrying this tradition on, but chugging pints of a much stronger alcohol now. You really see the structure to my right there. Now, earlier when I mentioned about the dam, that's the one I'm talking about, which is called the floodgates. It was built around nearly 200 years ago, and it's what's known as a Grade Stour listed structure, which essentially just means it's a very old building and that you're not allowed to change it. And that means for nearly 200 years, it's still made of the same building material as it was constructed with, which would have been cast iron. You can see it is slowly rusting away, but it is still in use and still very good at its job, actually. As you can probably see, there are those gates up there at the top with the little handles. There's 12 of those gates. There's small ones at the top, but at the very bottom there are 6 much larger gates. And it's said that if the council were to come down and open all 6 of those gates up, the entirety of this canal would be emptied out in about an hour and a half. Yeah, it's safe to say this area will never get flooded.
We will never. There's going to be uncontainable, right?
We thought that the previous bridge that we thought low was low, and haven't smacked this one yet. Do brace yourself on this one. We can try. Success rate of 3 out of 6 tries. I'm only kidding. There's no way in hell we can fit through that small gap. Then we arrived at this area here, which is where the old Abbott's Mill used to be. Just to get a grasp of how big the building would have been, it was about 6 stories tall, and it would have spanned from just past the shops here all the way up to the road. This building served as Canterbury's largest producer of flour, as well as also serving as its largest employer, employing about a third of the city at the time. But unfortunately, it succumbed to a great fire in 1923. On one fateful day of this year, one of the employees was having his cigarette break and decided to put the cigarette in the direction where the fire was put, catching the entire building on fire immediately. So a pretty fun science experiment actually to try to build you drop a bag of flour all around your house and put on the curtains, windows, doors, and ventilation systems, light an open flame, and then you can watch your house become a balloon on a hot day or something. Very loud, large explosion. Unfortunately, though, this building didn't explode because it was so large. Instead, it just went up in flames. Kind of boring. But since it went up in flames, and it was such a large building, the fire went on for about 3 that the roof is a little bit irregular on this. That's because of optic roof. At that point, the firefighters were faced with a very difficult decision. Do they save the city's largest employer and largest cloud producer, or do they save the local pub? You can see the sort of decision that they decided to go with. But believe it or not, this was actually a logical choice, because that pub is connected to the rest of the city after all. So if that caught on fire, so too would the rest of the town. I'm pretty sure they were very happy when they discovered that explanation. And now all that's left of the mill are just those two metal poles past the bridge there. So that's where the water wheel, or the mill, would have been. Yeah, in 1933, but this building was constructed around the Tudor period, the mid-1600s. Forget the mid-1600s. Sure. In operation for nearly 300 years. It says this floodgate was built in 1829. It was first introduced to control the speed of this river, so to control the speed of the mill river. Of course, since it's destroyed, now it's just used to maintain the water level. Look to my left, we'll see the measuring tool. But ideally, they would want to keep it at 8 feet deep or less. Any more than that, then we'll start opening up more of those gates. Oh, this one you can't stand up. I only went up there. This one, no. This is like an NBA for, yeah. Anyways.
600 pounds for the whole thing.
Obviously, this one is.
I think that would be easier to push this. Less energy.
The sides of these houses, you probably already noticed that a lot of them have gates that kind of step out into the river. This was long ago, during the medieval period, and even before that, these weren't houses. They would have been warehouses or storage facilities instead. This would have been an easy way for the boats to park right next to it and offload their cargo.
So yeah, there you are. So you wonder where the pub culture comes from in England and why we love drinking loads. That's why. Quite literally dependent on alcohol for hundreds of years, right up until late 19th century.
Some of them refuse to fix
now,
it.
this place nowadays has upheld that tradition of being useful drinking.
How old do you think this house is here?
Sorry?
How old do you think this house is in here?
It's really hard to say. I'm not entirely sure. I know the one all the way at the end is relatively new, so as you can probably see, it's a lot more modern. But these ones, at least a couple hundred years old, I would say. Maybe not more than 300 or 200. But obviously renovated. It's not made of the same material as it was constructed with, of course.
Can you visit these buildings if you go into them?
I don't think you can. That's because this building actually now belongs to the King's School, as well as this one here, where it serves as their art studio. As you can see, they're probably curious about all the art sculptures laying around. and this one's their exam hall. That's why I don't think you can visit it unless you want to have a criminal record. But the King's School they have a lot of their buildings actually scattered all around the city, but their main ones are on the cathedral grounds. And you'll very easily see if it's their building or not. There's usually like their logo or their symbol, a blue shield with a white cross in between. But the main buildings are on the cathedral grounds. And actually, if you graduate from this high school, as well as any other school or university here, you have your ceremony held in the cathedral, which was actually one of the main selling points for my mom to send me to university here. She just happened to stumble across a ceremony video on YouTube one night and thought, I have to send my firstborn son there. It'd be a good opportunity to see. Yeah, up at the University of Kent, my final year. UCA. What does that stand for again? I've heard it so many times. Yeah, okay. I remember it now. And whilst we're still somewhat on the King's School grounds, fun fact of the King's School, one of the oldest in the entire world, one of the oldest schools, as it was founded in 630 AD. By the same guy actually who founded the first Canterbury Cathedral called St. Augustine. I'm not sure if that name rings a bell to any of you. Yeah. Though at first when he founded the school, he founded it to be a seminary school, a place for holy men to learn how to read and write in Latin. But when King Henry VIII came about, reforming the church, he had the purpose of the school changed so that it would be a school for nobles and aristocrats, and also changing the name of it to be named after himself, the King's School. But today, it just serves as a private boarding school, where some would say it's still for nobles and aristocrats, as tuition fees can go up to £30,000 per school year. By modern theatre again. Do we know someone called Christopher Marlowe by any chance? Yes? Fantastic. Well, for those that haven't, he was born around the same year as William Shakespeare, but during their time, Marlowe was a lot more famous than Shakespeare. Unfortunately for the guy though, he died at the age of 29, having only written just 6 plays in his lifetime. This was primarily because he was known to have led a very unhealthy lifestyle, where he was a known heavy drinker, as well as a gambler to top it all off, where he ended up spending the last of his days in a random bar fight in Deptford, London. What a way to go for one of the country's best parents, in good old British fashion. Just gonna wait out here.
We've got another ancient building up here on my right. This is the Marlowe Theatre, built in 2011, so maybe not so ancient after all. This is a very modern bit of architecture right in the middle of a very old city. So when it was first built, it was a little bit controversial. Lots of people didn't really like it. It was designed by a London-based architect named Keith Williams. And when designing it, he seemingly broke an ancient city law which states that no building can be half as high as the cathedral. Out of respect, this back triangular shape breaks that law by 3 meters.
He's quite the sponsor.
Sadly broken for a good reason. So it is.
Reminder his again here.
All of these sets
Now, there's a lot of theories that surround Christopher Marlowe's death. He faked this bar fight and instead fled the country where he would go to Italy. Now, this stemmed from the fact that on top of him being known as a drunkard and a gambler, he was also known to be atheist and bisexual, which of course in the 1500s, in the eyes of the church, that's not a very good thing to be. So naturally, he was a wanted man. And he thought that the next best thing for him to do was to flee the country, where he'd still continue writing his plays in Italy, but of course he just wanted to publish them. Instead, he'd send them over to another playwright back here in England, for that playwright to publish under their name. And that guy was William Shakespeare. As Shakespeare does have a lot of plays that are based in Italy, which is somewhere he's never been to before. It was what's further strengthens this theory. And as a sort of incentive for you to try to find out this theory is true, the King's School actually has a bounty where you prove that Marlowe wrote a bunch of Shakespeare's plays, they reward you with £1 million. This also stems from the fact that Marlowe was one of the King's School's more famous alumni, being one of the first students actually after King Henry reformed the church and changed that school. If you do manage to prove it true, remember where you heard it from. RadarSoundtrack@gmail.com is how you can reach me. I expect 10% commission. These guys are not long ago, I believe last year, they used to clean their windows for them, and in turn would get free calzones. But I don't know, they've been stingy as the cost of living and whatnot. Lost a sense of community. Now, if you look over my left shoulder, just right above there, above where you guys boarded the boat, looks kind of like a seesaw. There's what's called a ducking stool. Now, contrary to popular belief, it wasn't used for witch trials, as that wasn't really a thing they did here in England. Instead, it was used as a tool of punishment for petty thieves, or scam artists, or dodgy salesmen, essentially, where they'd be tied up to that stool and dumped into the river, only for about like 10 or so seconds, which doesn't sound too bad, but do remember, this river, or this canal, was essentially like the sewer. It would be dumped in and coming out smelling like everyone's waste. And God forbid that you had an open wound at that time as well, which would essentially just be a death sentence at that point. But not only that, that thing also has wheels attached to it. So after you'd be dumped into the river, you'd be paraded to the high street so that all the onlookers can throw their rotten fruits and vegetables at you. At that time, in my opinion, that sounds like a very fun family outing. Provided I wasn't the one on the stool, of course. On a less fun note, it was known for some husbands to put their wives on that stool as well, if they believed that their wife was what's called a scold, which is an old English word for a nagging housewife. You're not allowed to do that anymore, though, thankfully. We are a progressive society. Congrats to us all. Go women! It's also good to note that that is just merely a replica, as the original would have been a health hazard to keep so close to us in the passing this year. As far as witch trials go, if you happen to have green eyes, ginger hair, or you were just simply a woman that knew how to do math, you'd be tried to be a witch, and then you'd be tied to that stool and dumped into the river for up to 4 minutes. Now, if you died, congrats, you're not a witch. That means you're a normal human being. So the executioner responsible for murdering you would write you a letter saying, thank you, you died, but you're going to go to heaven, so it's okay. Like, they would send a letter of apology to your family members and friends. But if you did survive, well, you're a witch, and you'll be burnt at the stake instead.